The ocean stretches endlessly, a canvas of restless blues and greys, broken only by the white froth of waves that crash against the hulls of ships driven by wind and rumor. In this unforgiving realm, men became legends not for kingdoms or crowns, but for freedom and terror. Pirates, as history tells us, were creatures of the sea, a lawless brotherhood bound by the code of survival and the lust for plunder. Yet beyond the tales of gold and battle, there existed a far darker, more intimate struggle, one rarely whispered in the taverns of Nassau or the secret coves of Tortuga. For months, sometimes years, these men roamed the seas without women, without touch, without the comforts of human desire. Their lives were punctuated not by love, but by the gnawing void of sexual deprivation, a reality that shaped their psyche and their legend in ways historians have only begun to understand. Life aboard a pirate ship was a crucible. Men, many barely in their 20s, crowded into narrow decks, their bodies pressed together in a constant struggle for space and warmth. The air was thick with the stench of unwashed skin, salted leather and gunpowder, mingling with the distant, ever-present scent of the ocean. There were no wives, no lovers, no moments of intimacy to temper the harshness of existence. Only the camaraderie of men, a brotherhood forged through violence, loyalty, and mutual necessity. To outsiders, these ships were floating dens of depravity and freedom. To those aboard, they were cages, each man wrestling with hunger, thirst, fear, and a desire that could not be sated by gold or rum. Legends tell of the sea wolves, pirates who were said to have tamed their desire not through mere willpower, but through ritual, myth, and superstition. Some claimed that the touch of a mermaid's hair, found tangled on a net after a storm, could grant men relief from their yearning. Others whispered that invoking the name of the sea god Dagon, with salt water and a whispered promise of abstinence, would grant them the strength to endure months at sea without succumbing to madness. There were stories, too, of ships cursed by the absence of women, where sailors, driven by desperation, would descend into violence against one another, or even themselves, haunted by dreams of flesh and warmth that existed only in the imagination. Yet for most pirates, survival depended on the mundane and the brutal. Work became their sedative. Hours were consumed swabbing decks, loading cannons, repairing sails, and keeping watch for the enemy or the next merchant ship ripe for plunder. The rhythm of labor kept their minds from fraying, a harsh but necessary discipline. But the body remembers, and the body demands. Ancient texts describe how men, pressed into the close quarters of a ship, developed an intimacy that was unavoidable, a closeness that was both comforting and tormenting. Touch became a currency, a subtle brush of the hand, a shoulder leaned upon, a shared blanket at night. Brotherhood was expressed physically, not in desire for women, but in the solidarity of survival. And yet, in the private recesses of the mind, the absence of sex was a shadow that no rum or fistfight could dispel. Myths arose to explain this deprivation. Sailors spoke of the ghostly figure of La Sirena, a spirit said to wander the decks at night, her presence both a promise and a torment. She would appear to the loneliest man aboard, singing a song that made his blood race and his heart ache, only to vanish as dawn broke, leaving him with nothing but longing. Such tales were exaggerated, certainly, but they reflected a truth all pirates knew. The sea was a mistress crueler than any woman on land, demanding devotion without satisfaction. The stories were as much a coping mechanism as they were entertainment, a way to articulate the impossible desires that simmered beneath the surface of everyday life. In truth, the struggle went beyond the myth. Letters recovered from the era, written in hurried scrawl and hidden in secret pockets, reveal the human cost of abstinence. Sailors confessed to a desperation that bordered on madness, a gnawing, unspoken need that colored their dreams with lust and frustration. Some wrote of fantasies so vivid they felt real, of imagined loves and whispered promises that vanished with the dawn. Others took to carving symbols into the wood of the ship, phallic shapes, hearts, and crude representations of women, each a private attempt to assert humanity in a world dominated by violence and salt water. The act of marking the ship became a ritual of survival, a way to claim some fragment of desire even when it could not be fulfilled. Yet not all pirates suffered quietly. Some turned their desperation outward, creating legends of aggression and debauchery that would echo through the centuries. Tales of brothels established in hidden coves, of captured women used to pacify crews, and of violent rivalries sparked by jealousy are rooted in kernels of truth. These acts, however, were as much about control and dominance as they were about sexual fulfillment. In the absence of choice and consent, desire became a dangerous, combustible force. And yet, despite the grim reality, many pirates managed to endure, channeling their hunger into cunning, bravery, and an almost supernatural resilience. The myths, the rituals, the whispered prayers, each was a thread woven into the tapestry of survival, a testament to the human capacity to adapt, even in extremis. Stories of legendary pirates offer further insight. Blackbeard, whose real name was Edward Teach, is said to have been terrifying not just because of his cannon and cutlass, but because of his reputation for strict control over his crew's impulses. Some accounts suggest he encouraged rituals and superstitions to maintain discipline, aware that desire unbridled could unravel a crew faster than a storm or a naval assault. He understood that the sea demanded focus, that survival required men to channel their instincts into strategy and loyalty rather than indulgence. His very legend, smoke curling from his beard, eyes like embers, became a narrative tool, a way to instill awe and fear, keeping the crew aligned even when the body screamed for release. Yet it wasn't all grim. Pirates discovered subtle forms of relief, some rooted in mythology, others in improvisation. Certain herbs, potions, and even dietary practices were believed to temper desire, often combined with storytelling or songs that celebrated camaraderie and the sea itself. Sailors would tell each other tales of gods and monsters, of adventures in far-off lands, weaving a fabric of imagination that temporarily displaced longing. Drinking, though a double-edged sword, became another outlet, a way to dull the edge of frustration and forge bonds of trust and humor. The shared laughter, the collective storytelling, the rituals, all became substitutes for what could not be had. And in some ways, these practices created the very identity of the pirate brotherhood. But the ocean, ever indifferent, offered no reprieve. Storms could last weeks, ships could become becalmed for days, and pirates would face hunger, disease, and death without the distraction of women or the comfort of intimacy. Some men succumbed to madness, their journals recounting hallucinations of lovers, phantom touches, and conversations with the dead. Others became philosophers of sorts, reflecting on the cruel lessons of isolation, the nature of desire, and the cost of freedom. In those reflections, myths grew, blending with reality until history and legend became inseparable. The stories of lust, denial, and survival became as essential to the identity of pirates as the Jolly Roger or the cutlass. As the sun set over the horizon, painting the sea in shades of molten gold, the men of the ship would gather, each lost in his own thoughts, each grappling with the same silent agony. They were a fraternity bound not only by gold and battle, but by shared deprivation, a common understanding that desire could be survived but not conquered. The myths, the rituals, the legends, they were all part of the arsenal that allowed men to endure months at sea without the comfort of women, without the satisfaction that the land provided. And as the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, they found solace not in touch, but in the stories themselves, in the shared humanity that made them more than marauders. They made them myth. In the quiet hours before dawn, a lone sailor might whisper a prayer to La Sirena or Dagon, his voice trembling in the salt wind, seeking strength that the body could not give. The tales of mermaids, sea gods, and ghostly apparitions were not mere superstition. They were survival mechanisms, imbuing the harsh world of deprivation with meaning and allowing men to endure what seemed impossible. And in that endurance, in the weaving of myth and history, the foundation of pirate legend was built, one man at a time, in the shadow of longing hunger and the relentless, indifferent sea. The days stretched into weeks, and the weeks into months, each marked by the same rhythm of labor and longing. Pirates learned to measure time not by the rising and setting of the sun alone, but by the toll of their work, the passing of storms, and the dwindling of supplies. Ships became their entire universe, floating islands of humanity adrift in an endless expanse of salt and sky. In this contained world, social dynamics were as vital as the mastery of the sea itself. Every gesture, every word, every act of camaraderie or defiance carried weight. Desire, though unfulfilled, was a silent current running through every interaction, shaping alliances, rivalries, and the very identity of the crew. Among the most fascinating of these dynamics was the creation of unspoken hierarchies of intimacy. Men learned to navigate the precarious balance between personal space and the unavoidable closeness of shipboard life. In the cramped bunks and shared hammocks, where bodies pressed together for warmth against the chill of the ocean, trust became a currency more precious than gold. Touch, even when devoid of sexual intent, became a lifeline. A reassuring hand on a shoulder during a storm, the simple act of sharing a blanket, or the communal act of huddling together during watches, all became substitutes for what could not be attained. Brotherhood was redefined, elevated to a form of intimacy that was both profound and necessary, a psychological balm against the gnawing void of sexual absence. Myths and legends provided additional scaffolding for survival. Tales of sea gods and spirits were not mere entertainment. They were frameworks for understanding and enduring the unnatural conditions of life at sea. The legend of Charybdis and Scylla, borrowed from ancient maritime lore, took on new meaning aboard pirate ships. These monstrous embodiments of chaos and danger became metaphors for the internal storms of desire and frustration. Surviving the treacherous waters of the world mirrored the struggle to survive the turbulent currents of one's own body. In whispered stories passed from one weary sailor to another, the distant, terrifying figures of myth became allies, symbols of endurance that taught men to master themselves, even when the sea offered no comfort. Sailors developed practical methods to channel their desire. Work, already a necessity, was transformed into ritual. Every task, from hoisting sails to loading cannons, became an act of discipline and focus, a way to redirect energy that might otherwise manifest in destructive ways. Music, too, played a crucial role. Sea shanties were more than rhythmic tools to coordinate labor. They were expressions of collective emotion, coded narratives of longing, hope, and even sexual frustration. Songs of mythical women, distant lands, and impossible loves allowed sailors to engage with desire safely, crafting an imaginative release that simultaneously entertained and preserved order aboard the ship. The act of singing together, of weaving myth into melody, created bonds that were both emotional and functional, reinforcing loyalty while providing a measure of psychological relief. Rituals extended beyond song. Some pirates engaged in symbolic acts designed to simulate intimacy without actual sexual contact. Stories survive of mock weddings between men, elaborate ceremonies rooted in humor, superstition, and a strange acknowledgement of the human need for connection. These rituals, while seemingly absurd, served a serious purpose. They allowed men to express and acknowledge desire within the boundaries of acceptable behavior. reinforcing cohesion while preventing the social breakdown that unchecked sexual tension could provoke. In the absence of women, these symbolic acts became vital. A creative adaptation that turned limitation into structure, chaos into myth, and frustration into a narrative that could be shared and understood. Even superstition itself took on sexual dimensions. Sailors were meticulous in observing omens, believing that certain behaviors, gestures, or even accidental touches could bring sexual misfortune or ward off madness. They would avoid specific spots on the ship during particular phases of the moon, or perform small, secretive acts designed to appease spirits believed to influence desire. The superstitions surrounding mermaids, long-haired beings who could lure sailors to frenzy or death, served as both caution and inspiration. A sighting of La Sirena could provoke longing so intense it became almost unbearable. Yet acknowledging the legend also provided a framework for restraint, a narrative that transformed unfulfilled desire into heroic patience rather than self-destruction. Despite these coping mechanisms, the physical toll of abstinence was undeniable. Diaries and recovered letters from the era paint a vivid picture of the struggle. Men wrote of restless nights, of visions that blurred the line between dream and reality. Some described the torment of watching potential mates pass by on distant islands, the agony of knowing that human contact was possible yet forbidden. Others spoke of the strain on their bodies, the psychological weight that manifested as irritability, aggression, or despair. In extreme cases, men turned to ritualized violence, dueling over perceived slights or imagined rivalries, the unchanneled force of desire erupting in ways that history sometimes records and sometimes obscures. In every account, the message is clear. The absence of sex was not a trivial inconvenience. It was a defining feature of life at sea, shaping behavior, hierarchy, and myth alike. Yet pirates were nothing if not adaptive. Across the Caribbean, the Atlantic, and the Indian Ocean, crews devised ingenious solutions. Temporary ports and hidden coves provided fleeting opportunities for interaction with women, but these encounters were often fraught with danger, moral ambiguity, and risk of capture. More commonly, pirates relied on communal solutions, shared storytelling, ritualized play, and myth-making. Tales of enchanted islands populated by beautiful, unreachable women or of divine rewards for patience became part of the daily fabric of life. Even when the stories were exaggerations or fantasies, they served a vital psychological function, allowing men to invest in a narrative where desire could be acknowledged without destruction. The very act of creating myth became a tool of survival, an acknowledgement that the sea demanded more than strength and cunning. It demanded imagination, discipline, and a mastery of the self. The historical record suggests that these strategies were remarkably effective. Pirates maintained cohesion in an environment that might have shattered less disciplined crews. Violence, though ever present, was managed through ritual, hierarchy, and shared belief. Frustration and desire, omnipresent and unrelenting, were transformed into storytelling, song, and symbolic action, creating a culture in which the impossible was normalized. The legends that survive, of men who endured years at sea, of terrifying captains like Blackbeard, of crews that moved as one organism across storms and battles, are inseparable from the psychological strategies that allowed them to endure sexual deprivation. The myths and exaggerations are not mere embellishment. They are historical evidence of the human capacity to survive in extremis. Some stories push the boundaries of credulity but remain instructive. Accounts of pirates claiming to have walked underwater for brief moments, aided by the magic of sea spirits, or of visions in which they conversed with women long dead, illustrate the blending of myth, psychology, and survival strategy. These were not simply hallucinations, they were imaginative mechanisms that allowed the mind to cope with the stress of isolation, labor, and unfulfilled desire. To modern readers, such tales may seem fantastical, but for the men who lived them, they were part of the lived experience of the sea, an interweaving of fear, hope, and necessity that transformed deprivation into legend. By the time a ship reached a port, months of tension, longing, and ritual had forged bonds stronger than any chain or shackle. Pirates emerged not merely as men hardened by combat and sea, but as survivors of a unique social and psychological experiment. They had learned to endure, to channel, and to mythologize the forces that might otherwise have destroyed them. The rituals, the superstitions, the songs and stories, these were tools of survival as potent as any cannon or cutlass. Through them, desire was neither ignored nor indulged, but transformed into something greater: cohesion, legend, and the enduring identity of the pirate brotherhood. As the first glimmers of land appeared on the horizon, the men would feel the tension of anticipation and relief. The myths that had sustained them at sea, the warnings of mermaids, the rituals of abstinence, the shared songs of longing, were still vivid in memory, shaping their actions even as human contact became possible again. Some indulged briefly, others continued rituals of restraint, and all carried the lessons of endurance into the next voyage. The sea had taught them patience, ingenuity, and the power of narrative to transform suffering into meaning. And yet, beneath every story, every legend, every exaggeration lay the unchanging truth. Desire is elemental, and the pirate's genius lay not in denying it, but in surviving it. Time at sea was both infinite and cruel. The sun scorched the deck by day, and the cold gnawed at the bones by night. Yet the true torment lay hidden, insidious, and inescapable. Desire, ever present and unrelenting, became a force that shaped every action, every glance, every whispered word. In the isolation of the ocean, long months without intimacy transformed men. For some, it became a fire that sharpened cunning and focus. For others, it twisted the mind toward violence, obsession, or despair. The stories of pirates enduring these extremes are as chilling as any battle at sea, and as enduring as the myths that surround them. Some crews, desperate to assert control over the uncontrollable, developed extreme rituals. Among the more famous, though rarely verified, are the accounts of the Brotherhood of the Night Watch, a sect within pirate crews said to have performed secret ceremonies to channel desire into collective strength. On moonless nights, the men would gather in the hold, forming circles and reciting chants that invoked the power of the sea gods and the protection of mythical sirens. Some claimed that through these rituals, men could transform longing into courage, turning sexual frustration into martial prowess. Others whispered that the rituals had darker elements, oaths of secrecy, symbolic sacrifices, and gestures of domination that edged into brutality. The stories survive in fragments, exaggeration mingling with truth, but the underlying principle remains clear. In a world without women, the mind invented elaborate ways to endure, to assert control, and to survive. Not all pirates were disciplined. Historical accounts, diaries, and occasional confessions suggest that unbridled desire led to catastrophic consequences. Men driven past the limits of restraint could succumb to violence, attacking companions in fits of jealousy or madness. There are legends of captains restraining their crews with chains not only to prevent mutiny, but to prevent acts born of desperation. One notorious tale tells of a small crew anchored near a forgotten isle in the Caribbean. A fortnight of inactivity and stormy weather drove the men to frenzy. The captain, fearing the descent into chaos, had to intervene personally, using both diplomacy and the threat of the lash to prevent bloodshed born of sexual frustration. These extreme cases reveal a truth often overlooked. The absence of sex at sea was not merely an inconvenience, it was a destabilizing force that could dictate the course of entire voyages, influencing hierarchy, discipline, and survival. Yet pirates were nothing if not inventive. Many turned to creative, often bizarre, substitutes to satisfy instinct without imperiling the social order. Carvings on wooden beams, representations of women in needlework, or dolls fashioned from scraps of cloth became private talismans. Vessels for desire that could be acknowledged without transgression. Some sailors even engaged in forms of role play, enacting scenes from myth or imagined relationships to relieve mental tension. These practices, though sometimes mocked by outsiders, were vital psychological tools. The mind, starved of intimacy, sought outlets, and the ability to channel desire into safe expression became a mark of survival. Such ingenuity illustrates not only the power of the human imagination, but also the resilience of the pirate spirit in the face of relentless deprivation. The myths of the sea, ever entwined with reality, played a crucial role in these coping strategies. Legends told of islands hidden beyond the horizon, inhabited by enchantresses whose beauty was so overwhelming that men would forget the world. Stories of the siren's song, which could soothe longing or drive sailors mad, were part cautionary tale, part imaginative release. Some pirates claimed to have glimpsed these islands, or heard voices in the wind that spoke like women, their tones both soothing and torturous. The ambiguity between reality and myth created a liminal space where desire could exist safely, acknowledged yet unattainable, celebrated yet disciplined. It was in this space that the pirate mind found both torment and salvation, a crucible of longing transmuted into story, ritual, and identity. The darker side of deprivation, however, could not always be contained by imagination alone. Some sailors, unable to bear the weight of frustration, turned to extreme behaviors that blurred morality and survival. Accounts survive, though heavily embroidered, of crews kidnapping women from islands, holding them briefly as an outlet for desire before sending them away, or engaging in coerced intimacy with captives taken during raids. These acts, while horrifying, were rare and often condemned even within pirate circles, who understood that such behavior threatened not only their code, but the fragile cohesion of the crew. Here, myth and exaggeration mingle with historical truth. Pirates and tales of sexual excess often reflected the fear and fascination of outsiders, yet they also illuminate the real psychological pressures of life aboard a ship, where long months at sea created a volatile mixture of desire, isolation, and opportunity. Even the most disciplined pirates experienced profound internal struggle. The diaries and letters of men who survived decades at sea reveal a rich inner life marked by reflection, imagination, and moral negotiation. One recovered journal from a pirate sailing the Caribbean in the early 1700s describes nights spent dreaming of impossible loves of women so beautiful they seemed to be carved from moonlight itself, of intimate encounters that dissolved with the dawn. In the margins he wrote prayers to gods and spirits, invoking protection and patience. These writings, blending myth, exaggeration, and personal confession, provide an intimate window into the human cost of sexual deprivation. They show how men navigated the tension between desire and survival, between instinct and discipline, and how imagination became as crucial as cannon or cutlass in the arsenal of endurance. Some pirates turned their frustration outward into collective enterprise. Long voyages required cohesion, and leadership often depended on the ability to channel men's energy productively. Captains like Bartholomew Roberts are said to have maintained strict codes, blending fear and ceremony to keep desire and the chaos it could produce under control. Work became sacred, music became medicine, and storytelling became ritual. The imaginative space created by myth allowed crews to project desire safely, while simultaneously reinforcing loyalty, hierarchy, and group identity. It was a delicate balance, a constant negotiation between human nature and the demands of the sea, one that required ingenuity, authority, and a deep understanding of the psyche. Legends, of course, grew from this interplay of reality and myth. Stories of pirates encountering mystical women who could calm storms or grant visions of secret rituals that transformed desire into strength, and of invisible forces guiding the hand of a captain, all served to amplify the drama of life at sea. Exaggeration was not merely for entertainment, it was a survival tool, a way to give shape and meaning to experiences that were otherwise uncontainable. Myths provided moral frameworks, psychological relief, and a shared language through which men could understand and endure what might otherwise have destroyed them. The line between history and legend blurred, creating the larger-than-life figures whose exploits continue to captivate imagination centuries later. By the time a voyage neared its end, men had endured storms, hunger, violence, and the constant ache of absence. The skills developed to cope with sexual deprivation, ritual, myth, work, camaraderie, and imaginative play were as vital to survival as any seamanship. And when they finally returned to port, the world of land, women, and possibility did not erase the lessons of the sea. The stories they told, the legends they perpetuated, and the myths they embodied were forever colored by months of longing and restraint. Desire, in the end, was not defeated but transformed, becoming a source of narrative, cohesion, and identity. The pirate, in surviving the sea, had survived himself, mastering the impossible tension between human need and the relentless demands of life afloat. As the ship's anchor dropped, signaling the end of another voyage, the crew dispersed to the taverns, markets, and hidden coves of the port. Some sought relief, some sought distraction, and some simply sought to share stories. In every case, the months at sea had left an indelible mark, shaping behavior, imagination, and legend alike. The myths of mermaids, sirens, and gods of the deep were no longer just stories. They were living symbols of survival, proof that men could endure what seemed impossible. And as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, casting the water in molten fire, the lessons of the sea remained: patience, ritual, imagination, and the careful transformation of desire into power and narrative. When the port finally came into view, a glimmering promise against the endless horizon, the men of the ship felt a tension unlike any storm or battle they had faced. Months, or even years, at sea had honed their bodies into instruments of survival, but their minds carried scars invisible to outsiders. Desire, suppressed and transformed, surged in anticipation. For some, it erupted in revelry, carousing in taverns, seeking companionship, drink, and fleeting intimacy. For others, the rituals, myths, and disciplined restraint cultivated aboard ship persisted, shaping a new, strange equilibrium between freedom and desire. The return to land did not erase the lessons of deprivation. It amplified them, creating a duality that would define the pirate psyche for the rest of his life. Historical accounts suggest that reintegration into society was neither simple nor entirely joyous. Pirates returning from months at sea found themselves ill-prepared for conventional social interaction. Their survival had depended on extreme focus, obedience to unspoken codes, and the careful navigation of desire among men. Suddenly confronted with the complexities of women, families, and civility, many struggled. Letters from the era recount men haunted by their own fantasies, unable to reconcile imagination with reality. Some found themselves seeking the ritualized control they had mastered at sea, projecting it onto social interactions, while others succumbed to impulsive acts, revealing the fragility of the mind after prolonged abstinence. The myths that had preserved them on the ocean, the stories of mermaids, sirens, and sea gods, remained active in the imagination, influencing dreams and behavior long after the ship had docked. Pirates themselves cultivated these myths deliberately, recognizing their power. Tales of enchanted islands, seductive spirits, and divine tests became part of oral history, shared in taverns and inns, exaggerated with each retelling. These stories served multiple purposes: entertainment, caution, and psychological continuity. They reminded men of the harsh realities of the sea, provided moral guidance in a world of lawlessness, and allowed audiences to witness, vicariously, the endurance of human desire. By framing their own deprivation as heroic struggle, pirates transformed personal suffering into legend, ensuring that their lives, and the lessons they carried, would echo across generations. The integration of myth with history is perhaps most vivid in the legendary figures whose exploits have been immortalized in books, songs, and modern imagination. Blackbeard, Edward Teach, navigated the high seas with a fearsome reputation, not merely because of his brutality or cunning, but because he understood the importance of controlling both desire and narrative. His crew, bound by ritual and superstition, became an almost mythical extension of himself, a living testament to the interplay between discipline, psychology, and legend. Similarly, Bartholomew Roberts, famed for his strict adherence to codes, demonstrated how order, imagination, and social structure could coexist with the chaotic, isolating environment of the sea. These men were more than pirates. They were architects of myth, shaping both their crews and the stories that would survive centuries. Beyond the captains, the broader community of pirates developed sophisticated methods for mitigating the consequences of sexual deprivation. Shared storytelling, collective rituals, and even symbolic objects became essential components of the pirate world. Dolls, carvings, and representations of women were treated with reverence, hidden in secret compartments or passed along as talismans. Music and poetry served not only as entertainment, but as a medium for expressing desire safely. Sea shanties, with their coded references to women, distant lands, and forbidden love, functioned as both release and cohesion. Through imagination, ritual, and myth, pirates transformed the absence of sex from a destabilizing force into a foundation for identity, community, and narrative. The social and psychological consequences of this prolonged deprivation also extended to decision-making, morality, and survival. Pirates had to constantly negotiate between instinct and discipline, desire and danger. Failing to control these forces could lead to mutiny, violence, or psychological collapse. The legends of the sea, while entertaining to those on land, were not mere embellishments. They were reflections of adaptive strategies honed over decades. By creating stories of supernatural forces, enchanted islands, and mystical interventions, pirates found ways to externalize and manage internal struggle, turning frustration into structure, imagination into survival, and myth into history. Yet the psychological imprint of the sea's deprivation lingered long after the voyages ended. Letters from retired pirates, preserved in private collections, describe a lingering tension between longing and restraint, between fantasy and reality. Even years after abandoning the life of the ocean, these men carried the rituals, stories, and myths that had preserved them. Dreams were populated by sirens, mermaids, and spectral women. Songs hummed in quiet moments recalled the shanties of youth. And secret carvings or talismans remained as reminders of the endurance required to survive. In these remnants, the interplay of myth, psychology, and history becomes evident. Pirates' legends are inseparable from the lived experience of sexual deprivation, their heroism inseparable from the struggle to endure what few on land could imagine. The broader cultural impact of these myths is equally profound. Tales of mermaids luring sailors to ruin, of enchanted islands that grant or deny desire, and of ghosts who punish excess or reward patience entered the collective imagination of Europe, the Americas, and beyond. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were instructional, moral, and psychological frameworks, conveying lessons about the dangers of unbridled desire, the necessity of discipline, and the power of imagination to transform suffering. Through literature, folklore, and oral tradition, the lessons learned on pirate ships became accessible to anyone who heard or read the tales, ensuring that the endurance of desire at sea would echo far beyond the Caribbean or the Indian Ocean. Even modern interpretations of pirate culture reflect the enduring legacy of these struggles. Films, novels, and documentaries often dramatize sexual excess, betrayal, and adventure, yet the historical reality was far more complex. The legends of restraint, myth, and survival inform contemporary understanding, reminding audiences that the pirate's life was not simply one of lust and violence, but one of psychological ingenuity, ritual, and adaptive creativity. The blend of reality and myth, fact and exaggeration continues to captivate, offering both thrills and insight into the human condition, revealing the depths to which men will go to endure, adapt, and transform desire into legend. As night falls over a port city once frequented by pirates, the shadows of their ships may be long gone, but the echoes of their struggles remain. The taverns, markets, and hidden coves where men once sought relief are now silent. Yet the stories endure, from mermaids to mystical islands, from ritual to song, from imagination to legend. Pirates mastered the impossible tension between human desire and the relentless sea. Their lives, filled with deprivation, risk, and myth, offer a window into the extraordinary lengths humans will go to survive not only physical threats, but the demands of the mind and body. And as the stars wheel overhead, glittering like a treasure hoard cast across the heavens, one can imagine the whispered tales of old sailors, the chants of mythical gods, and the quiet, enduring truth that desire unfulfilled, yet transformed, became the foundation of legend. In the end, the pirate's genius was not simply in plunder or battle, but in the capacity to endure, to ritualize, to mythologize, and to transform desire into narrative, cohesion, and identity. The sea, vast and indifferent, demanded much, yet it also witnessed the extraordinary resilience of the human spirit. Men who had faced storms, hunger, disease, and unfulfilled longing emerged not only as survivors, but as creators of enduring myth. The lessons of the high seas, of patience, imagination, discipline, and the subtle alchemy of myth and reality remain timeless, a reminder that human endurance is not merely a matter of strength, but of creativity, ritual, and the capacity to turn suffering into story. And as the last ship sails toward the horizon, leaving the port behind, the echo of 1,000 untold stories drifts across the waves, of longing unmet, of ritualized survival, of myths that became history, and of pirates who conquered not just the ocean, but the most relentless currents of the human heart.